I discovered that a lot of times in the Bible, when it talks about spiritual gifts, it's not talking just about having overall ability long term, but it's talking about God giving a very specific spiritual ability in the need in the moment to meet the need of the moment, and that those are both sort of connected. So what I wanted to do is tell you three stories from my own life today that have had to do with my understanding my own spiritual gift and how to use it, and what it means for me. Now, this is just stories. They may help for you, they may not help for you, but let me just tell them. So, story number one is an example of a time that God gifted me with something which is very much not my normal spiritual gift. So, I was living in the dorms as an undergrad, and my roommate and a couple other people were very new Christians, and I was kind of discipling them. I was kind of in charge of sort of growing them up in the faith. And I came into the dorm lobby one day, and one of my roommate came over and said, "We've met these girls who are in a church very much like ours, and we're just having, it's great to talk to them. Come and talk to them." And something happened to me which almost never happened in those days to me, and that is God gave me the gift of discernment. What I mean is, I immediately just knew. I just knew that something was really wrong, that these were not Christians. But it was strange because I had no reason to think so. So I didn't want to just say, well, these are not Christians, because I didn't know. I mean, that's not giving a reason. So I prayed, God, as I was walking over to meet them, God, why are you giving me a concern about this? What's going wrong here? I don't know. And he didn't give me any more insight than that. So I did the only thing I could do. I said, well, let me just see if I can find out what's going on. So I started asking them about all sorts of different doctrines, thinking maybe they're in some sort of heresy somewhere. Maybe they're part of a cult or something. And along the way, I said something about the Holy Spirit. And they answered and talked about Holy Spirit. And I thought, that's odd. And I stopped and I said, I noticed when I said the Holy Spirit, I said the Holy Spirit, but you just said Holy Spirit. Is there a reason for that? And they said, yeah, a lot of people misunderstand. They think of the Holy Spirit as God, and it's just Holy Spirit. And I said, so you don't think the Holy Spirit is God? They said, no, the Holy Spirit is just having a spirit, which is holy. And I said, do you think Jesus is God? And they said, oh, do you think Jesus is God? And I knew all of a sudden why I had had this big check, why this big caution. There was clearly some non-Christian theology going on here. So once I got to that point, though, we could just go based on what they said. And so later on, I could talk to my roommate and my other couple of friends and say, do you notice that they don't even believe in the Trinity? They don't even believe in true Christianity at all. It's a different group altogether than that. And I wouldn't have known to do that without that moment of discernment. It just never would have occurred to me to go that deep into their theology, except something had warned me that it was wrong. So I thought, oh, maybe God's going to do that for me all the time. So I started praying for that, but he hardly ever did it. It never happened again for years and years that I can recall. But that was an example of a place where God gave me a specific gift for a specific thing. But I think it's because that was the need. Somebody had to know that this was a dangerous group of people for my very young Christian friends to start learning from and admiring and taking their cues from. And so I think God just said, Kevin needs to know this. And so he just tipped me off. But it's interesting. He gave me the very least amount of knowledge I needed, just enough to get me to be able to use my normal human and natural abilities after that to figure out what was going on. So that was an interesting thing. And I always remembered that it happened, that it tells me that God can always do something, even if it's outside my normal gifting. All right, the second story was a really significant one for me. It was the moment that I most understood what using my gift could mean. I had come to, so this was several years later in another college where I was in grad school. And I'd come to understand by then that my gift was knowledge. And my understanding of what that means for me has changed over time. It's grown, I think, since then. But at the time, I just knew that there are all these times when I had been trying to sort out an issue biblically, and I had gotten insight into it, which had just made it all clear to me. It was really, I understood something, some key question, which was very complicated, very tricky, but I could see a clear way to look at it. It's like, oh, just look at it this way, and it will all fall into place. And that had happened, but none of it was very useful because it was questions that nobody had except me. But I really loved it, but I couldn't figure out how to use it. So anyway, fast forward to this time, and I was part of something our church did known as a midday Bible study. We did these 3 times a week on a campus of several tens of thousands of people, and it was meant evangelistically. We had about 15 people there, probably about two-thirds of them were Christians, but probably there were about 5 people or so every time who weren't believers. And our pastor Rob used to lead this, and it was a long discussion of controversial questions. What the questions that people had about Christianity. Why would a good God send people to hell? Or what about the heathen in Africa who've never heard? Or how can God allow suffering? Or other things like that. And so we would discuss those. And I remember that I was frustrated because we would talk about these things, but we gave somewhat superficial answers. And it was, and I kept thinking these answers aren't really answering the real questions. And so I talked with Rob and I said, we need to get deeper. We need to go into giving better answers than this. And he said, no, we want to keep this simple. Most people aren't asking the questions you're asking. We want to keep it simple. We want to keep it easy for people to follow. And I said, but sometimes people aren't getting the answers they need. And he said, well, but this is to really evangelize and we need to keep it simple. And I was frustrated because I thought we're not meeting the needs. And he was frustrated because he thought he's not supporting what we're trying to do here. And one day I went and we had a series of questions, some question or other. I forget what the issue even was, but there's some question. And a fellow named Ray, who was a believer in our church, asked a question, and they answered him. And I could see in his face that he was kind of discouraged that they didn't really answer it. And then we moved on to something else. And that would have been that, except at the end of the meeting, it suddenly occurred to me, what for some reason had never occurred to me before, that I could go up and talk to him. And so after the meeting, I walked over and said, "Hey, Ray, that was a good question." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I noticed when we responded that you didn't seem like the answer really completely answered it for you." And he said, all of a sudden, his whole face changed. He said, "No." He said, I don't get it, and I still don't understand that." And I said, "Well, I have some other thoughts. You want to sit down for a minute and talk about it?" And he said, "Sure." So we walked a few feet away and we sat down, and I went through with him one of these things that I'd worked out, several years before, and it really worked for him. He was like, "Oh, that is so helpful." He said, "That completely answers the question I had, and it makes so much more sense now." And he walked away excited, and I walked away excited. I thought that was really cool. My first thought is, for the first time, I've gotten to take one of these bits of insight that God has given me and use it for somebody in a way that's really helpful for them. And then the second thought hit me. I was like, wait a minute. All this time, I've been upset because they haven't been changing the Bible study to be the kind of thing I thought it should be. And maybe God just wanted me to be walking up afterwards and talking to people individually, and that was the whole point. And I decided it was. We didn't need to change the Bible study. Rob was completely right. Would have been too complicated. But what I started doing was every week I would watch and listen. And about every 2 or 3 weeks or so, somebody would have a question that wasn't answered. And I would walk up to them afterwards and say, "Did you feel like you needed a deeper answer to that?" And if they said yes, I'd said, "Here's how I'd look at it." And they would go, "Oh, thank you." And I sort of had found my ministry. It was passing on those words of knowledge. But I didn't need to be the teacher. I didn't need to be in charge to do it. I could just do it one-on-one with one person at a time if I was sensitive and alert to what was going on. And that changed my view of my gift in a lot of ways. Especially, it taught me that sometimes the things that we're frustrated that other people aren't doing are actually just God's way of trying to call us to do what he wants us to be doing. That it wasn't Rob's problem. It had been my problem because I wasn't responding to the things I was seeing. And God was showing me the need, not so that I could complain about it, but so that I could solve it myself one-on-one in the ways that he called me to do it. And that was really the beginning of growing and using that gift. All right, so the third one is to me the most important and the most illuminating. Fast forward a few more years. I had really begun to understand the area of spiritual gifts a lot more, and I had really begun to think for the first time about this idea that I could ask to be gifted in small ways as the need arises. I'd thought about that happening with discernment way back when, and so I thought, I'm going to do that kind of thing more. And my father had just passed away, kind of unexpectedly, and he was in another state. And this was several days later, and I flew out for the memorial service. And afterwards, after the memorial service, I was standing around a room, um, big room, and I was talking at this particular point. Was talking one-on-one with his wife, my stepmother, and she said to me, I know that I need to just trust God, but he died somewhat young, and he was working on some really important medical. Well, actually, I'm telling the story wrong. First of all, she just expressed that she was just, I could see that she was just very sad. And I remember thinking to myself, I need the gift of mercy right now. I mean, I care for her, but I have no idea what to say or do. And I want to really show her mercy. And I remember praying, God, that's not normally my gift, but would you gift me with mercy just for this, just like you did discernment that one time? And if you don't, that's okay, but would you if you would? And I went completely blank. I had no idea what to do. I froze up. And I thought, this is so weird. I want to help. I really froze up completely, had nothing what to do. I thought, well, God's not answering that prayer. And at that moment, my brother, Andy, who was, you know, long ways away across two rooms, turned around and walked all the way across both rooms, walked over to Pat and gave her a hug and said, you look like you need a hug. And he just gave her a hug and she just softened. And I thought, okay, or you can bring Andy in to show mercy. Whatever you want to do, that's fine. So that was the first half of the story. It was, I prayed and God said, good prayer. I'm going to answer it using another believer. You're not the one with this gift. He's the one with this gift. He's going to show mercy to her. And it's good that you prayed, but notice I'm not going to use you for this. And he hugged her. She said, thank you so much. He walked away. She turned back to me. And now she said what I started to tell you. She said, that's much better. She says, the thing that I still don't understand is that your father was doing this important medical research, was going to save a lot of lives. And by cutting that short, it doesn't make sense that God would take him at this time. And I wish I understood that. And I thought to myself, oh, this is a knowledge question. This is my gift. Maybe I could be able to answer this. And I prayed, God, just give me the perfect verse or passage or something to say to this. And as soon as I prayed it, the verse came to mind and that I should share. And I shared it with her, said, this is the verse it reminds me of. This is the idea it reminds me of. This is how I look at it. And she, again, there was like a whole softening. And she was like, thank you. That's very helpful. So it was so interesting because I prayed for a gift twice. The first one I prayed for was a gift of mercy. Sometimes he might have given it to me. Sometimes he wouldn't have given me a particular gift of it, but I would have still, of course, shown mercy. But this time, he actually brought somebody else from across the room to do the thing I wanted that needed to be done because they were the one who was gifted in that. And then he turned around and said, Kevin, I still want to use you. I'm just going to use you in the way that your gift works with. So I'm going to have you ask you a question where knowledge will help. And I prayed, and instantly he gave me the verse, he gave me the way of sharing it, and I saw when I shared it that it was the Holy Spirit was in it, and she was encouraged by it. So those are three of my stories that have really changed the way I think about spiritual gifts. I guess the moral of it all is what I ended with last week. Pray. Every situation, if you see a need, pray for the gifting to meet the need. Be ready that sometimes God will give you a gift like the discernment that doesn't match your normal gift. He'll just do something surprising in you. Sometimes he won't give you any particular gift and you'll just do the best you can to meet it. Sometimes he'll use somebody else to meet the need, like he did with Andy. And sometimes you'll realize it's something that is specifically in your circle, and it's something that he does gift you for, and you'll use it and be excited to see this is what God is doing in me. And that will shape your understanding of your ministry going forward. That will shape your openness, your sensitivity to the places where you can use the things that God has gifted you to do, and whether it's things you say or ways in which you serve. So that's we'll come back to look at some more scriptures and some more questions next week, and I'll see you